I was driving home after working a late shift at the office. The road was empty and quiet as I drove through the winding rural roads. Tall trees lined the sides of the road, their branches creating a canopy overhead that blocked out the moonlight. As I navigated a particularly sharp curve, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road just up ahead. I slammed on my brakes and squinted to try and make out who or what it was. At first glance, it appeared to be a woman, but something seemed off about her. She was unnaturally still and was staring right at my car with an expressionless face. My heart began to race as I sat there idling, unsure of what to do. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, the figure started shuffling towards my car at an awkward gait. As she got closer, I could see that her limbs were twisted in unnatural angles and her neck was crooked sharply to one side. Her face was colorless and sunken, with cloudy eyes that seemed to stare right through me. I was paralyzed by fear as she approached the driver's side door. Her mouth opened slowly, letting out a chilling moan that sounded almost robotic. As her grayish fingers wrapped around the door handle, I snapped out of my terrified daze and slammed the car into reverse. My tires squealed against the pavement as I sped backward and then jerked the wheel around to escape her. I caught one last glimpse of her in my rearview mirror, standing motionless in the road staring after me before I rounded the curve. My heart was pounding against my ribs as I sped down the dark road. I kept glancing in my mirrors, terrified that I would see her chasing after me. After a few minutes I came upon a gas station and pulled in, my hands still shaking against the steering wheel. I sat there for a minute, trying to process what had just happened. It felt like some kind of twisted nightmare, but deep down I knew it had been real. Eventually I composed myself enough to go inside and ask the cashier if they knew anything about a woman wandering this stretch of road at night. They looked at me puzzled and said the road was always deserted after dark. Feeling a sense of dread in the pit of my stomach, I got back in my car and continued home. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night or the night after. I kept replaying those chilling moments over and over in my mind. Had it been some kind of ghost that I had encountered? A zombie or reanimated corpse? Nothing seemed to make sense, but I knew I had looked into the eyes of something that was dead, yet somehow alive. A few days later, I reluctantly drove down that same road, telling myself that whatever I had seen was surely gone by now. As I approached the curve where I had first seen that awful figure, I felt my throat tighten. Slowing down, I steeled my nerves as I came around the bend, half expecting her to be standing there again, but the road was empty. I let out a sigh of relief and continued driving. It wasn't long, though, before I came up on a police blockade just up ahead. My sense of dread returned. I pulled up to the blockade and rolled down my window to speak to one of the officers. He explained that there had been an accident the night before. A young woman had lost control of her car on this winding road and had veered off into the trees. She had been killed instantly. As he described where on the road it had happened, I felt my blood turn to ice. It was the exact spot where I had seen that woman standing in the road, the same place where I had looked into her cold, dead eyes. Over the next several weeks, I became obsessed with finding out more about the accident. The woman's name was Anna Shaw, just 22 years old. Photos shared by her family showed a pretty girl with rosy cheeks and bright eyes, not the pale shadow of a person I had seen that night. I began driving down that road frequently, never seeing her again, but somehow knowing she was still there. Watching and waiting from the dense trees. A couple of times I thought I heard her terrible moan carried on the wind, but I couldn't be sure. Why had I seen her that night when no one else had witnessed the ghostly apparition since? I wasn't sure, but I knew with absolute certainty that what I had seen was Anna Shaw's tortured spirit trapped between this world and the next. My encounter with the spirit of Anna Shaw was something I would never forget. Whenever I drove down that winding rural road, I still sensed her lingering presence hidden among the trees. Though she may be at peace now, the chill of our terrifying encounter will haunt me forever. When I was around 10 years old, I started having trouble sleeping at night. It wasn't that I was afraid of the dark. In fact, I always kept a nightlight on in my room, but there was something about being alone in my bed at night that filled me with dread. My parents told me there was nothing to be scared of. They said I was just having bad dreams and I needed to be brave. But it wasn't just dreams. Even when I was wide awake in the middle of the night, I could feel an unsettling presence lurking in the shadows of my bedroom. The hairs on the back of my neck would stand up, and I knew I wasn't alone. I never actually saw anything. My room would look completely normal, just shadows cast by the moonlight outside my window. But there was something there with me, watching me from the darkness. I started leaving my closet door open at night because I was terrified that something was hiding inside, but even with the closet exposed, I could feel its presence. My parents got me a stuffed animal, thinking it would comfort me at night to have something to cuddle. I named him Mr. Bear, and having him in bed with me did help a little. But some nights, the ominous feeling was so strong that even Mr. Bear's fluffy presence couldn't make it go away. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up shuddering, certain that someone or something was standing right next to my bed, watching me. I squeezed my eyes shut, clutching Mr. Bear tightly, too scared to move. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, the feeling started to fade. My breathing returned to normal, and my heart stopped pounding in my chest. But I didn't dare open my eyes. I fell back into a fitful sleep, waking up exhausted the next day. I started begging my parents to let me sleep in their room at night. Of course they said no, telling me I was too old for that. I needed to learn to sleep by myself. But the haunting presence in my bedroom wouldn't leave me alone at night. I resorted to sneaking into my parents' room once they were asleep. I'd quietly curl up on the floor by their bed, feeling immediate relief being near them. In the morning, they'd march me back to my own room, annoyed at finding me there, but it kept happening. One night, my dad decided he'd had enough. After returning me to my room for the third time in a single week, he took Mr. Bear from my arms. He told me that if I can't sleep by myself, I don't deserve a stuffed animal. Tears streamed down my face as I watched him walk out with Mr. Bear in his hand. I begged and pleaded for him to bring my bear back, but he refused. I laid down in bed, sobbing into my pillow, and minutes later, the sinister presence returned. But this time seemed even stronger than before. I could swear I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. Something brushed up against my feet under the covers. Without Mr. Bear to protect me, I pulled the blankets all the way over my head and squeezed my eyes shut. There was no sleeping that night, or any night after that. My parents held their ground, telling me I was acting silly and needed to get over my irrational fears, but I knew this was no imaginary monster. Whatever lurked at night in the darkness of my bedroom was all too real, and it was getting braver. I started turning all the lights on at bedtime, trying in vain to keep the entity away. I wanted to tell my parents what I knew, that this was not just a phase I could get over, but they wouldn't understand. No one would believe a word a child said about the horrors that haunted her own bedroom late at night. So I suffered in silence, bags growing under my eyes from lack of sleep. I jumped at every creak and groan of the old house settling, certain it was the entity making itself known. I avoided my room altogether during the day, terrified to even enter the place that delivered me into its claws each night. To my parents, I was just being stubborn and ridiculous, but inside, I was living a nightmare no child should have to endure. The safety of my own bedroom shattered by an unseen, menacing spirit only I could sense. Unable to get adult help, I was locked in a battle of wills with the darkness. My only hope was to stay awake until morning's light delivered me from its grasp. I prayed for the nights to pass quickly, for the light of day to send the entity slithering back to the shadows, but my stamina was no match for the restless nights. I was home alone, as I often was these days. Ever since my wife passed away last year, the house has felt empty and lonely. I missed her laughter, her warmth, and her presence. As I ate my microwaved dinner in front of the TV, I thought I heard a noise coming from upstairs. It sounded like footsteps creaking on the floorboards. I muted the TV and listened closely. I was just hearing things with a sigh, and I turned the volume back up. A little while later, I thought I heard the noise again. It was definitely coming from upstairs. Feeling uneasy, I muted the TV again and called out timidly, but there was no answer. Who could be up there? I lived alone unless someone broke in. I had to go check it out. I slowly crept up the stairs, holding my cell phone out in front of me in case I needed to call for help. "Who's there?" I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice, but there was still no answer. When I reached the top of the stairs, I realized the creaking was coming from the extra bedroom. Hands shaking, I went out and slowly turned the doorknob. I flung open the door, expecting to see an intruder, but there was no one there. The room sat empty, just as we had left it after my wife died. Only the furnishings that remained were clothes and a rocking chair. My blood turned to ice. The rocking chair was moving back and forth, creaking loudly on the hardwood floor. There was absolutely no one sitting in it, yet it rocked steadily back and forth. What? How? I stammered, unable to comprehend the terrifying sight before my eyes. As I stood there dumbfounded, the rocking began to pick up speed. The chair rocked faster and faster. The creaking grew louder and more insistent. It was as if some ghostly presence was making itself known. I wanted to run to get out of there, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear. I suddenly shouted, and the rocking immediately ceased. The chair became still once more. Had I imagined the whole thing? No. Impossible. Some dark energy was in this house, and it was trying to get my attention. I slowly entered the bedroom, flipping on the lights. I cautiously approached the rocking chair. I reached out a trembling hand to touch it. The wood felt ice-cold under my fingers. That's when I noticed it. Carved into the chair, there were letters written by Mary. Mary, my wife's name. Tears sprang into my eyes. "Oh God, Mary," I whispered, "are you here?" As if in response, the chair suddenly began rocking violently again. The force was so powerful, it seemed the chair would break. I stumbled backward, crying out in alarm. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. "Leave me alone." The chair kept rocking wildly. The entire room seemed to tremble and shake. I had to get out of there. I raced downstairs 2 steps at a time, heart pounding in my ears. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of lucid nightmare. Ghosts didn't exist, did they? I decided I needed to get out of the house immediately. I grabbed my car keys and coat, fleeing into the night. As I pulled out of the driveway, I could see the light in the bedroom window flickering on and off. I drove around aimlessly, needing to escape whatever was in that house. After about an hour, I began to calm down. I started thinking rationally again. I was letting my imagination get the best of me. I was still deep in grief over losing my wife, and my mind was playing tricks on me. There had to be some logical explanation for the chair rocking. It could be a draft or old floorboard settling. Feeling a little silly, I headed back home. I took a deep breath as I walked through the front door. "Hello?" I called out cautiously, but there was no answer. After double-checking the locks on the doors and windows, I trudged upstairs to the extra bedroom. The light was still on. With trembling fingers, I slowly turned the doorknob. I braced myself for the chair rocking again, but it sat perfectly still in the center of the room. No movement, no creaking. I let out a long sigh of relief, just as I thought. It had all been in my head. I shook my head, laughing at myself and my overactive imagination. I went and sat on the edge of the bed, running my hands over the familiar quilt. I missed my wife terribly, but she was gone. I had to accept that and move on.